If so, you don't want to miss today's episode of Nico Penguin's Gamer's Guide to Productivity, the podcast where we explore the amazing potential of gaming to improve our skills, connect with others, and achieve our goals. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by a web developer, a game developer, an instructor, and many more other hats. Mario, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Nico. It's a pleasure to be here.
And so, since you are joining us today and you have many, many hats, first we're going to touch base on the gaming aspect that uh, s- you
Mhm.
started off with. And I do want to ask, for example, what is your preferred gaming system, and why would it be the PC?
Yeah. So I think I remember my first gaming system that I ever had was Super Nintendo. That was my
Ooh,
first video game. But before
same,
that, I
same.
used to have something called it was called Polystation. It was like a
Mm.
cheap version of it, but it was good. It was like it used to be a PlayStation, but it was you put a cartridge on it, so it was like a Chinese version of the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
That one was a good one. That's where I started to play Mario and all that. But I think the one that really I enjoyed was the 360. The one I played the most. Xbox
Ooh.
360. Yeah, yeah. What about for you?
Oh, favorite? I would have to say the PC hands down, but the 64 was my first system as well. And that one, I fell in love with Smash Bros on that.
Oh
I fell in
wow.
love with Mario Kart, especially when you're playing with your friends and you're really getting really competitive, and you lose by like a smidgen. You don't lose by big, you lose by small, and those would be like the absolute
Oh
worst
yeah, it
losses.
had all that percentage stuff, right? Like if it goes high, you just fly over the screen. That
Yeah,
was
those would
amazing.
always be the most annoying. But you mentioned the Xbox 360 was your primary favorite.
Yeah, yeah, because so it was a kind of the generation where I just had my PS2 like just burn out to something bad happened with it, and then my mom she bought me a 360, and I was like I never heard of Xbox. I didn't know what was Xbox about it,
Yeah.
and then it came with a game called Banjo and Kazooie, right?
Mm.
The 360 version. And oh my gosh, I know the game it wasn't really good, but I just played that thing so much, like just building cars and things like, wow, this is amazing. And it was a weird time as well because I didn't have network access, so I couldn't play online. But it
Hmm.
was just playing like which one was that? The Banjo and Kazooie, Halo, and all those. Yeah, was a really good system at the time.
And how do you think that because you had an early start in gaming, that has enabled you to take some skills that you might have acquired there and actually be applicable to your real life?
I think what I learned from like developing, like creating games and all that is that like all the work you do, it does at some point reflect on your life. Like if you're doing things like, let's say, today you're learning how to do an inventory system or something like that. So
Hmm.
you're gonna learn how to apply that eventually on your job, like because it creates that logical thinking that helps you forward. Like it's like you grind yourself up,
Mm.
is a way to expand your skills, like, and then also a good thing as well is like it helps, for example, right, you're trying to create a 3D world or something like this, so you start to
Hmm.
look for attention to details, and then you just it helps you improve for sure.
Interesting. And so because you're so fixated on those finite details, it enables you to not only do it in the game, but also IRL in real life.
Yeah, yeah. It's like it's a kind of hard concept to explain, but it's like, okay, let's say you're doing like a scene, right? And then
Yeah.
when you're working with like 3D or any game, actually, especially if you're doing by yourself, you're doing not only the game, the idea itself, but you're doing the 3D, you're doing the animation, you're doing the audio. So you start to really once you have all the things start to come out, so
Mhm.
attention to detail help you to combine everything, and then once you apply that to your real life, I think it helps you move forward, even if you're doing stuff for your own. Definitely, the reason why the job I got right now is because of the game development thing that I been working with. So
Oh,
definitely that helps. Yeah.
so definitely we gotta know, how did that happen? How did gaming,
Yeah.
game development help you get into land you that job that you have right now? Is it the web development job?
Yeah. 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 So yeah, is the idea of that is because when I first arrived to UK, I started work as a waiter,
Mhm.
and then I had just finished computer science, right? And I couldn't get a job, right? Is that whole loophole, like you need experience to get a job and can't
Yep,
get a
yep.
job, and it's just that thing. So the one of the main reasons, like I wanted to start game development, is because it was I wanted to do something related to like learning more about development, and gaming development was a way for me to push myself and get the jobs and eventually get experience enough to move my career forward and things.
So you're saying because you started as a waiter and then you transitioned over into having the game development and you accrued those skills that you were essentially like scouted out to actually be a web developer?
Yes, yes, yeah, exactly.
Wow,
I
that
know
how
it,
complicated is that?
it is complicated. No, it's like I did had a experience before with web development, but
Mhm.
is that at the time that I moved, I didn't work with with web development for a while, right? So you lost the skills and things. So because I couldn't find any job at that point, what I start to do is to learn. I aim to be like try to become any developer of any kind. So
Mhm.
in order to get experience, I was like, what do I like, right? What do I love to do, and things like this. So I start to, can try to make games. Let's see how that does that go.
Right.
And then eventually you need to do websites, you need to do posts, you need to do a bunch of things. So I was doing at the same time working with my game development skills, grinding up and learning web development. So eventually, I applied for a web developer um, company, and then they
Mhm.
accept me. And then that was because of the thing you were doing as a like with the gaming development, I suppose. I'm not sure it's a little bit confusing, but that's like one helping the other.
So you essentially you got into web development by game development, but you got into game development by just thinking, "What do you like to do?" And then just, "You know what? Imma just create a game."
Yeah, yeah, basically.
And then to get into web development, they were like, "Hey, you're creating games. Why don't you help us create a website?"
Yeah, so the web development part was because I had some experience previously, right?
Mhm.
And then I was like applying for companies, and I couldn't find any experience or as
Yeah,
that
yeah.
thing, right? And then so what I did is, in order to find those jobs, I tried to create portfolio, like some projects and things that I was doing.
Yeah, yeah.
So what I ended up doing is like I create my first game, which was the name was like The Wizard Returns. It was a really cheesy name.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Um, so what I did is like I created a website, put the page on it, like it was like a really simple PHP thing. And then I put the game on it, and then people could download it for like the mobile phones. I put it on also Google Store, and then because of that, I had the portfolio to follow. So because I couldn't apply for any game development roles at the time, I could manage to get a web development, and now, yeah, it keeps. That's the reason why
And
it comes
because
it comes together.
yeah, and because you are getting pulled into web develop or you got pulled into web development from game development, you also became a web development instructor.
Yes, yes, that web development structure, also game developer structure as well. I do have a couple of courses on Udemy. So I do teach. Right now, I have Unreal Engine course that if you want to create a RPG inventory from scratch.
Mhm.
You can follow in that. So it's a quite cool thing to do it. Like I show how to do all sorts of uh, change your sword and things like this. All sorts of stuff you do in RPG. It's a quite fun series.
And where can somebody that is interested in learning how to do that, is there a specific profile, or how would they find your specific course, or on Udemy?
Yeah, so you can follow, open up my GitHub. On my GitHub, you have all the links
Yeah.
available for the courses, also the RPG open source, even web develop open source things that I have as well. They're all available in there. So it's nice to have a look, and you may find something you love on it.
And now, I didn't know about the that you also do the game development, instructing too. So now that makes me think, how do you actually balance your work as a web developer at Just Move In with the passion of your indie company, through MJGT Studios, and a game developer instructor and a web developer instructor? How do you balance all that?
This is where I know it's a little bit messy, but this is where I'll it start to come together at some point, right? Is
Mhm,
because is that whole is that it's the learning journey, right? So you started like you don't know what you're trying to do, and then you start to okay, I'm a web developer now, but I really love game development. So I start to create projects on my evenings or I'm free of work,
mm, mhm,
so I could for myself and teach some people as well, and maybe help release like open source projects and things. So I could help other developers as well start on their path, right? So and because I'm also a web developer, right, then I have also some project open source for web development. So I know it's two different things, but
yes.
they are kind of linked for me, like together, because I feel they're the same thing for me. Like I do helping a community of web developers help
Mhm.
community of game developers, and it all comes together, right?
Oh, so it's not that complicated of a balance if they're almost identical per se.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, is everything is down to development, right? So
Mhm.
development is a very like is a word that can means it means many things, right? When you're
Right, right.
doing a development, you do gaming or websites, but at the end, it's all about programming and logical thinking. So
Mm.
you can extract that and say, okay, so if I'm one thing that, for example, the RPG inventory series that I was doing, I
Mhm,
based that on a web development e-commerce website that I did once. So because of those ideas, I was able to translate to a asset for Unreal Engine.
mhm.
So that I had the idea to create a course, and because at that point, I knew it, what was the mistakes for someone who was starting and the
Yeah.
difficulties that someone was starting, so I could translate that into a course and improve myself as well and help other developers if they need some help.
Yeah, because I heard that when you actually try to explain it to somebody else, you actually learn more because you have to condense the information into a bite-sized chunk, and so it's almost like you're learning twice as much because 'cause you're regurgitating what you've learned, but now you have to put it in a simpler way.
Yep, definitely. It's really like it's pretty incredible how much it helps you when you showing someone like something when you explain something. So that's where all my open source stuff coming up
Mhm,
because of course at the end of the day you're trying to make something for yourself, but you
mhm.
also try to help other people's and helping yourself, like
Right.
selling all this, creating this environment and open source. I'm really big fan of open source stuff. I think that's the way. Yeah, and that's how we grind up.
And so that makes me think, how do you, as an instructor, as well as a user of web development and game development, how do you actually stay current and continue to learn in this rapidly evolving industry?
Right, right. Yeah, that's a good question, right? Obviously, playing a lot, right? That helps. That's the top one,
Yeah,
especially if
yeah.
you're a game developer, you have to play. But yeah, I think is there's also like there's a lot of stuff coming up every day, but at the end of
Mhm,
the day, there's always those fine things that are always the same. for example, user interface. You know where the user is going to go, and then you can apply that to other things. Like, for example, like when you try to use, let's say, World of Warcraft, right? The the game, right? If you
Mhm.
try to when you drag an item over to another slot, you expect the item to go through. This is just an example, right?
Right.
In web development, you have kind of the same things. Like when a user press enter, you expect to see a message and things.
Mhm.
So you because you have such a similar structures, and those structures, they don't change very often, right? What it
Mhm.
changes is more like the structure behind, in the sense of what's the engine they're using, or the framework or language they're using. This is something that changes rapidly, right? But if
Right.
you, as long as you have those concepts in mind, that what's a for each loop, or things like this, that's really similar to programming, right?
Mhm.
They don't tend to change very much. You'll be fine. Yeah, it's just most of the times what it changes is just structure related to languages and things like that.
And
So
so
you.
how do you get your new information then if you have the foundation that
Mhm.
is not really gonna be changing? How do you get, your information? Do you, follow certain people? Do you research a specific way or at a specific time, like every 3 months or once a year?
I think is more like is is almost a point of is like when everyone start to using it, right? When you, for example,
Oh,
the I am working I work on a framework called Laravel, right? Not sure if you
yeah.
heard about it before. So sometimes that framework comes new versions and things. The same with Unreal Engine now, which like it came up, like they just introduced something called Lumen right now, which is
Mhm.
fantastic. So when those big companies, they push for these new big technologies, the time to learn those, like, is the time for you to push yourself, yeah, because when at the end of the day, it all comes to, if someone is a big company is doing something similar, maybe I should do it as well. Follow the standard. So you base
Oh.
yourself on big companies to just try to keep together and apply on your stuff.
And so because it's an open source software, you don't really have much of a cost expenditure going into it. It's more so of how much time or you're going to input into learning that new software and how it's going to be affecting what you're currently doing now.
Yeah, because all the community, they change with it. So it's really like it's really nice to see. It's really refreshing. Like it's not something rushed. It's really
Mhm.
soft, the change. Is indeed like, if, for example, if you stop programming today and then you come back the next 10 years, it's going to be a lot of stuff different. But if you keep following day to day, then
Mhm.
is you don't feel very often those changes, so you just follow through. It's things like your friends say, oh, have you seen this new technology, and then you just keep following, and you grind yourself.
That's actually pretty intriguing, because when you think of open source, for me, I'm not a web developer, so when I think of open source, I'm always thinking of, like, Linux and operating systems.
Hmm.
Um, I'm rarely thinking of open source web development software, so that's
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
pretty intriguing.
yeah, that there's actually loads of that, and like is a really cool concept, because what you get when the whole business behind is that the tool is for free, right?
Mhm,
But then you
mhm.
sell your services on it on top of
Right,
this, and then just putting Laravel again back to the spotlight is like, so Laravel is a free software, but they have those services. They work really well on enclosed as like, so if you use Laravel, if you don't know, it's just a framework for
right,
PHP.
right,
Let's say
right.
you want to do e-commerce. Um, it's similar to WordPress, kind of.
I was just about to ask you about
Yeah,
WordPress because I pulled it up and I see PHP, I'm like, "Wait, isn't that similar to
yeah,
WordPress?"
yeah. It's a kind of similar thing, but is a more raw state of WordPress, right? But what happened? Even WordPress will be a good example, right? If you sign up with them, they have their own servers and all things, so that's how
Mhm.
they make the profit thing.
And so is it a more customized version of, like, the WordPress PHP, or is it well, speaking on the one that you mentioned, the Laravel, is that one more of a customized, like a JavaScript and CSS, or is it a more a standardized way of doing things?
So it's a more standardized version of it.
Oh,
So they
okay.
have a bunch of standard things already built for you. But think like a toolbox, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're building yourself e-commerce, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
let's say you're building yourself a game, for example, right? And then you need a logging system. So you get that piece of code that you put in there. You need a character system, like just giving the contracts between. So it's pre-built stuff that you put it together and then you apply your layouts and things. So it's a more raw state of WordPress. WordPress is already something that you expect it to be running, and then you already
Right,
have
right, right,
posts
right.
and stuff. So Laravel is more raw. So you start from scratch basically. But yeah,
Oh, so it's literally like a blank canvas where
canvas. Yeah,
you get to dictate. So the application is literally up to the whims of the person who is creating it.
yeah, yeah. Pretty much a game. When you open up an engine, you're like, that's a blank canvas. Where do
So
I
so
go
you're
now?
able to use it not just in a game, but you can use it also in a web page as well, or a web?
The funny thing is, like, you can pretty much do anything you want. For example, right?
Wow, that's
th-
cool.
there is a couple of games. I think which one was it? Fall Guys. I think they have like a server, right? And
Mhm,
that server, if I'm not mistaken, I think was writing Laravel. And basically, what happens is like Unreal Engine send information to this Laravel framework, which is a server. It's just a web server hosting somewhere else.
mhm,
And then you store like your score and things like this. So the next time you log in on your computer in another place, it brings all those score backs, right? So
mhm.
this is just an example how would you use Laravel.
Wow, that's actually pretty cool. And when you get a new software like that that can literally change how you use your own web development and game development, how long do you typically take before you update your Udemy courses and explain that to aspiring web developers and aspiring game developers?
All right. Yeah, that's a good one. I recently I had done a RPG course before,
Yeah.
and then that was when Unreal Engine like version 4.26 came out, and
Hmm.
now I had to rebuild the whole course because Unreal Engine 5 came out. So the reason, like, yeah, that's like normally you try to update the course, like those
Hmm.
most of those platforms, they especially if it's open source. Like what I tend to do is most of those projects that I do, they are open source. So in the sense,
Hmm.
the student can go and download themselves. So what I do is I keep maintaining the code, so they're always up to
Oh.
date, and updating the lessons as well. Like I see, for example, I had a issue with one of my courses the other day. The Unreal Engine 5.0 came up, and then it broke one of the a way you handle display widgets and stuff, right?
Hmm.
And because of that, I had to rebuild a whole lesson explaining why you had to change this. And then I also updated the code. But sometimes you got to start from scratch. It's easier to do it.
So are you referring to sometimes you have to start from scratch when there's a new update and nothing
Yes.
else is applicable?
There is it's easy for the user to follow as well. Like it's easy because then of course, you can maintain that, right? But it's
Mhm, mhm,
always easy to, especially if you're doing a course, because it's easy to teach the person, like, okay, the new update came up,
mhm.
so now we're going to do this from scratch. So this is how Unreal Engine is doing. So let's apply this, and there's opportunity for you to learn as well more about the new technology as well. But sometimes if it's something simple, you just do a new lesson. Yeah.
Ah, so sometimes those updates are literally like when you're playing a game and you die and you have to start all the way from scratch, like on Dark Souls or something where
Oh,
there
yeah.
is no checkpoint there. You got to start all the way from scratch and none of the previous information applies.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh my goodness. No, that's actually pretty intriguing because as you mentioned, that enables you and it kind of forces you to learn alongside with the students. And since you already are well versed in the language of the web development a little bit more than the students, you would learn the information much sooner and be able
Mhm.
to explain it as mentioned. You summarize and explain it in a way that they can understand.
Yeah, yeah. And like one of the things I always try to do is was just, keep it simple. No, don't need to be complicated.
Right,
Because at the
right.
end of the day, like development is quite a complicated thing, right? And then
Mhm.
I always try to find that, sweet spot where everything's easy and nice to see and just make it simple. And then if that person wants to make it complicated, then they can do a deep dive after. But for every lesson I try to do, or even this open source stuff I do, it's just normally if you're installing, it's just three lines things. Or if you like I recently have created an asset for Unreal, which is for inventory RPG. Like so, let's say you're creating a Dark Souls game, you need an inventory,
Mhm.
and you're doing Unreal. Just download my assets, and it's a really easy setup. So I always try to aim for the sweet spot.
Huh. And so far, in your experience at Udemy, what have you learned as an instructor?
Hmm. Yeah, I have learned that people like you to go really slow with the cursor, right? Take your time, narrate everything, which is part of the thing, right? And
Right.
also diagrams, a lot of diagrams. People like diagrams.
So people are visual learners or they prefer a visual aid in the wordy, programming world, huh?
Yeah.
Oh.
Um, yeah, I think, and one thing as well, like, is nice to mention, like, for me, like, I love coding, but I think blueprints, like, I'm not sure if you know what's blueprints related to Unreal. I'm not sure if it's like what I can explain here. Basically, is there Unreal Engine. The reason why I love that thing so much is because or you can code, literally write code, right? Or you
Mhm.
can use something called blueprints, which is literally a visual things that you drag and drop over, and then they
Oh my
connect between them,
goodness.
right?
Yeah, it looks
Um,
like a mind map.
so for me, I am a web developer. I see code every day. I wish I could programming in blueprints. That would make my life much more easier. I know it's a little bit slower, but it's easy to understand what you're trying to do.
Oh my goodness, if when I was in college and they were teaching me coding like this, I might have become a web developer myself. Yes, this looks so simple. It's literally is it click and drag or how do you
And just drag and drop, connect nodes between them, and a little bit more complicated than that, but yeah,
wait,
once you
but
get
why
your
do you
head
say
around,
this is a slower way? Because wouldn't typing in instructions into a
it will be much
program be
faster. Yeah, it will
you
be
said
much
that's
faster.
faster than clicking, dragging and dropping?
Yeah, typing will be much faster than that because when you're typing, you have the literally the access right on the screen, all the
Yeah,
files and things. So
yeah,
it's a different way of thinking, right? And
uh-huh,
i- people say that is faster to do by coding than actually by the blueprints.
yeah.
But I prefer doing by blueprints because I understand better the code and I have time to think about it.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
that is so cool,
But the
and
good
that's
thing as well is like, for example, if you're more a
uh-huh,
design person, right?
yeah, yeah,
You probably will go by the nodes version. And
mhm,
the nice thing as well, if you have a more programming oriented person, right, you would go
mhm,
by the coding stuff. They can work on the same file together because Unreal does the so you can work or in Blueprint or in C++.
yeah,
plus plus. Yeah, so they can work together. It's great.
simultaneously like that?
Yeah, yeah, they can do that. Yeah, as well.
Wow, and that's just with the Unreal, way of coding.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much.
Wow,
I
that is
know
so intriguing.
Unity has something similar as well. I play around.
Mhm.
I think it's called Vote, but I haven't I didn't have that much experience with the Unity one. I had more with Unreal.
Wait, so these are all because I know that with programming, it's all their own individualized languages. So these are their own way of understanding of piecing things together. Like one I think is like a semicolon to go to the new line, another one's a tab, another one's a comma, another one's an enter. Like they're their own individualized worlds. And so do you specialize in a specific one or do you try to touch base on at least a good 3, 4, or 5 of them, or how's your process of developing?
What I mean to construct the application, like how is my process to create a I don't know asset or
Right,
a
right.
game or
How do you
something?
how do you go about, like, trying to understand what language you're going to dominate, because you just mentioned like 3 or 4 different
Mm,
coding
yeah.
languages as if it was nothing, and I'm just like, I know the names of those, but you actually know the implementation of those.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it all comes to like what kind of game and what kind of person you are. Like in the sense, what kind of game I'm trying to create and
Mhm,
what a kind of person I am. I am more like a visual person. I'm more
mhm,
like a coding person. And I know both of those engines they now share, kind of the same things. So you can do
mhm,
blueprints in Unity as well. They have a version and vice versa. But for me, for example, right, I am if I'm doing, let's say, a 2D game, right, based on all the experience that I got with using Unity before and Unreal and all those engines and Cry Engine, for example, something like that, I would go for Unity because some things that I experience with Unity is easier than with Unreal for 2D. But if I'm doing a 3D game, I would go for Unreal because of performance and visuals and out of the box, it looks much more easier to use if you already had some experience with it. It all depends of literally your project. And I know that everyone says that, but it's literally like it depends what you're trying to achieve, right? So let's say if you're doing a 2D game,
mhm.
Unity is the way, I would say, based on the experience, right? And then if you're doing a 3D something, I'll just go for Unreal for sure.
And are those, open source or are those, not open
Um,
source?
I think Unreal Code is open source. You can open source in the sense they give you the source of code of the engine, so you can create your own plugins and stuff, but
Yeah.
you still have to pay the royalties to Unreal Engine after. And
Mm,
Unity, I don't think it is. I think they do have the open source as well in the in the similar way that you can create your own assets and applications and plugins.
mhm.
But the engine itself is under the the I forgot the license name, but they're like they own to the companies, so you have to pay the royalties after you release your game.
And so then what would be your preferred web development, programming language of choice?
PHP for sure.
And that's because
PHP.
that all the different, abilities from Laravel amongst other ones?
I think that is basically web development. Right now, there's more languages coming up, right? But when it comes to web development, you have backend and front end, right?
Mhm,
And then I think the backend part of it is right now you have .NET, which is popular. PHP as well is quite popular, and then you have Golang, you have Rust coming up. But all those languages, the one that for me and I think is really impressive because it's almost 20 years old or more than that is PHP. It keeps coming up. The PHP it was dying a couple of years ago, like 10 years ago, and then Laravel
mhm.
came up and just resurrected out of nowhere. And that's why, and also right now it's about the community, right? Everyone
Right.
uses it, and then you can, let's say if you want to become a web developer, you
Mhm.
can, and then if you start with Laravel, you can pretty much get a job anywhere you go, right? So it's a
Yeah, because
really good thing.
it's, 80% of all websites are using PHP.
Yeah, yeah, something. I think it's divided between WordPress and Laravel almost, and then you have some other frameworks as well, but those
Mhm.
are the biggest one.
And so because I was gonna ask you what tips would you give somebody that's interested in game development and web development, and you pretty much answered that one right there. It would be to start off with either learning WordPress or Laravel, PHP, because they're almost guaranteed to, land you some sort of employment opportunities, or at least you'd be able to know how to create or manage a website based off of just those 2 languages.
Yeah, I think if you try to become a web developer, right? I think I would give advice is like maybe try to learn HTML like and see if you like it, right? Because
Oh.
if you don't like it, it becomes really hard. I see people, friends that they join uni and they're like, oh, I'm gonna do it just because it's a lot of money and things like this. And then after 3 years, they're like, oh my gosh, what I'm doing here, right? So, so it's if you're joining just for the money, just be aware that it may be it may not be nice. But if you're joining because you love coding, solving problems, and you just want to create your own thing,
Mhm.
then it will be a very enjoyable experience, even for game development as well. Like everyone thinks game development is, this amazing thing, but when you start to do it, like, oh my gosh, it's sound, 3D, character, animations, and it keep piling up.
And yeah, that's intriguing. And so so theoretically, then after somebody, of course, they visit your Udemy and they take your web development courses and get well versed. Theoretically, they should go for the Laravel first, because as you mentioned, if they try the HTML and they don't like it, and then they go to Laravel or WordPress, it'll be a much easier way of understanding. Plus, most of the websites are already using one of those two different programming languages.
Depend if the person wants to become a game development or a web development, right? If you're trying to become like, I mean, you can do both at the same time.
Hmm.
Like I do game development in the evening, work normal job in the morning. But if you wanna like work with game development, for example, the
Hmm.
easiest way to start it is just uh, you know uh, do just download any engine you like, or try to, let's say you want to create a 3D, just go for Unity or Unreal. They both have really good entry points. And then I'll tell you, like in a week using those, if you don't like it, you're not gonna be doing that. But if you love it, then it's gonna be your thing. Like I think Unity is, if you learning, is best to start point, because it's more easy, user friendly to use, right? It's a much more user friendly UI to use. But Unreal as well is quite good. They have good assets and tutorials now, especially now. Like Unreal now,
Hmm.
they have more tutorials than they used to be like 3 years ago when I started, because it's getting more popular, even with the Unreal 5 now. So they're really trying to push new developers, and they always have those constant prices as well. That you do, cinematics and things that they if you want, you get some incentive to keep carrying on your development stuff. Yeah.
That's intriguing. Now, last two questions that we're encroaching on. What is your favorite or your most memorable gaming experience that you can remember?
Right. That one is a good one. Do you remember a game called Dante Inferno?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that one. I know is a quite old one, but the reason why is just because I just got my 360 and I saw that game. I bought that game. I was like, oh, Dante Inferno, what's this about? And then it was the absolutely crazy game. I was like, I was not expecting that at all. The cinematics and the blood and all that. But it was a really good game at that
Oh,
time
that's
for me.
That's interesting. And last question. What is, if you're able to answer this, of course, if you can't, just let me know. What is the favorite product that you have created, whether it be a game development that you did for your indie company, whether it's something that you did for another company, whether it's a website that you created for yourself or for another company? What is your absolute favorite? And by favorite, I mean you always put that one closest to your heart next to the 360.
Right, right. I do have a couple of games that I'm doing that are supposed to come up some point, but they're not finished products yet, so I can't talk about those. But one product that I have finished, which is an open source thing, is on my GitHub. It's called Skeleton Admin, and that's
Mm.
basically is a multi-purpose framework. So let's say you create a e-commerce, you can use that. You can put out e-commerce together using that thing in less than a week. Like, so it's a very
Wow.
extendable thing. It can is a multi-tool for development. That I did it for myself, but I think that is good for people as well to use that.
Wow, that sounds super productive. For people that are going to know how to definitely take advantage of that, definitely check out Mario's links in the description below, wherever you're listening. Thank you so much, Mario, for joining us today. That was really amazing. Everything from the background that you gave into how you got into game development, how you got into web development, how you're giving back and teaching individuals to use open source. Uh, Once again, let everybody know where they can support you as an indie developer, as an instructor, and everything else that you're doing.
Yeah, so you guys can check out my GitHub, and there it has pretty much everything that I'm working on. It. I always keep that thing update with all my social links and LinkedIn and the Udemy courses and everything.
Well, thank you so much. And if anybody's still listening, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We learned so many important skills today, how we can develop ourselves through gaming, how can we apply it to every aspect of our lives in order to improve our productivity, increase the likelihood of success. And as Mario mentioned, he gets a free pass for gaming because that's literally his job. So if you've played a lot of video games and you don't think that you're doing anything productive, that is not true. Make sure to rewind and listen back to how you can take those skills that you've learned into actually making the best version of yourself. Once again, like, comment, and subscribe. Mario, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day. Make sure to check out his links below. It's been a wonderful interview.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.
Cheers.